In 1963, in the remains of this medieval village, archaeologists came across a pit filled with human bones.
And 56 years later, it's the starting point for our most bizarre investigation yet.
Look, all these lovely bones.
It's the ultimate cold case. Someone's twisted someone's leg off.
Taking us on an unlikely journey.
I see nothing but disaster once this gets going.
We'll be racing across the countryside.
High speed ahead.
Uncovering gruesome clues. People were so hungry, they were forced to resort to cannibalism.
I've got a bone.
9 out of 10, I think.
9 out of 10? Oh, fantastic.
And through this whole process, I'll be keeping an open mind.
This is what we would describe as a zombie, right? A walking dead.
Right.
No matter how utterly weird things get.
We're stepping outside of the pages of archaeology and we're stepping into the pages of fiction.
Nowadays, stories of vampires and revenants are the stuff of entertainment. But in medieval Yorkshire, did people believe in them for real?
Maybe they still think it now.
The British Isles have a very long history. People have been living here for tens of thousands of years. And the further back you go, the more elusive and mysterious the lies of those ancient Britons appear to be.
Stonehenge, what's the point?
It's a bit like Lego.
Oh.
Who were these ancient Britons? What did they believe? What was their world like?
Are you a fan of human sacrifice?
I don't practice it myself.
As a talk show host, I should know how to ask a good question.
Where are we going to, Marianne?
Clive, we are off on an adventure.
But answers are not really my strong suit.
Mummies or not mummies?
It's a tricky one, isn't it?
So I've roped in someone with more insight into the ancient world than I'll ever have. Anthropologist Mary Ann Ochota.
Old bones,
Old
looking
stuff.
at the past, you know everything, don't you?
I like to ask a lot of questions about the past.
Together, we're going to unlock the mystic secrets of the ancient Britons.
Prepare to embrace the very odd indeed.
Right, I'm ready for all comers.
Now, assuming the GPS is working properly, I should shortly be arriving at the village of Warham Percy.
Abandoned in the 1500s, it's one of the best preserved medieval villages in the entire country. But it holds a secret so grisly, you're scarcely going to believe it.
Warham Percy is on the western edge of the chalk wolds of North Yorkshire, about 18 miles northeast of York. It's remote and bleak, hidden away from the modern world. Is it just me, or does that sound like paradise? No? Just me, then.
Well, it's a perfect day for it. Icy, crisp underfoot, but beautiful sunshine. Could be something out of the Yorkshire Tourist Board. Walking in a winter wonderland.
They tell me Warham Percy is the best preserved medieval village in Britain. But what we've got here, to my expert eye, is a field with nothing in it.
Ah, Stuart.
Clive, good to
Thank
meet
you. Well, I've come here to look at Warham Percy.
Yes.
So where is it?
Here.
Stuart sees a medieval village. I see, well, not a lot, actually. And that's being charitable.
The buildings have gone, but the foundations are still here.
Oh,
You
excellent.
can see the lumps and bumps.
Yes,
going
they're
down here.
molehills. I'm not taking that as a village, I'm afraid.
Even I can see the old church, but the rest of it is pretty much gone. And that's what most people would think, until you take a look at the site from above. Because from the sky, it's a different story, as the layout of the whole village suddenly becomes completely clear. Established 1,000 years ago, this medieval village consisted of around 40 houses, 2 mills, 2 manor houses, a village green, and a church that's still more or less standing today. The presence of the church shows this was a substantial village filled with God-fearing Christians who lived, worshipped, and died here. In fact, by this time, the whole of Britain was Christian and had been for hundreds of years.
But what sort of house is this? It's a single-storey house made out of what?
They would have been made out of crook timbers, as they're called. And so they were bedded in the wall foundations on either side and then came to a point.
Yeah.
And they form both the walls and the roof. They're the main structure. And then
And
there would
walls
be
made out of?
wattle and daub walls.
Yeah.
Just built along the sides. Thatched roofs.
Yeah.
Which is why, of course, there's nothing left of them, because the only stonework is in the foundations.
Yeah.
Although we spent 40 years digging here,
Yeah.
we've done less than 10% of the village area.
All right. Well, you better crack on then. Well, I don't be too sort of London-centric about this, but this feels like quite a remote place here now. Would it have been remote in medieval times, or would there have been lots of villages dotted around these hills and valleys?
Lots of villages. This one probably had about 150, 200 inhabitants.
So this was a thriving village, or people living here until when?
Until about the 1520s.
So, what, 500 years or so of occupation as a village?
Yes.
So it must have been quite a nice place to live, otherwise people wouldn't have stayed here all this time.
Sounds lovely. Just your average, run-of-the-mill medieval village. Or is it?
There are some rather darker finds.
Of course there are. I knew there'd be a reason Marianne sent me here. Across from the church, outside the boundaries of the graveyard, archaeologists made a disturbing discovery.
There is one find that we made, which was a pit, which was just here,
Right.
which contained over 100 human bones.
Buried here. How many people?
At least 10.
So we're standing on the last resting place of 10 people.
Yes, which is a bit strange, because most people in the village, you would think, would be buried down in the churchyard.
Yeah, we can see just the top of the church
Top of the church.
with a graveyard around it.
Yeah.
But some people buried here.
Yes, it was thought at the time when this pit was found in 1963 that it must be before the medieval period, because we knew Romans were living nearby, so it could be prehistoric or Roman bones.
And they might have just left their bones here.
But as ever, it's not that simple.
Some of them were radiocarbon dated and found to be medieval, when
Right.
everyone should have been buried in the churchyard, not out here in the farmstead.
The mist is coming up just as you're telling me this to make it feel rather creepy.
Speaking of creepy, Marianne, what do you think?
Clive, you charmer. So here's the thing. Is there something about a perfectly normal medieval village that could explain a pit of human bones? Because that is definitely not how good Christian people buried their dead. Luckily for me, the Weald Downland Living Museum in Chichester actually has reconstructed parts of a perfectly normal medieval village. And it gives us a good insight into everyday life at Warren Percy. Catherine, hey.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Right down to having no lights. So, medieval life. Pretty, but a bit gloomy. Catherine, this space is amazing. It's beautiful, isn't it? Is this a typical medieval peasant's house?
Yeah, it's very well constructed, and it gives a really good idea of how life would have been like.
I mean, who would actually live in a house like this?
So we probably have multiple generations, perhaps an aged parent that you're looking after, as well as yourself, a spouse, and any number of children that you have.
Talk me through the average day in the life of an average medieval peasant.
It's very seasonal. When you've got the sowing coming in and it's harvest time, you've got all hands on deck, you've got long days of work. But then you've also got the fallow times in the winter when you might be sort of sitting around the hearth helping to make baskets and carve your wooden objects as well.
Farming, rearing livestock, basket weaving. None of this sounds like a breeding ground for human bone-burying madmen. This house kind of gives you an idea, doesn't it, of what an actual home would be like.
Absolutely, and you've got all of the nice bits and furnishings. You've got the sort of household objects there, the trenchers and the ceramic ware and so forth, and this lovely chest over here that I just absolutely adore. This is the kind of thing we've got evidence at Warren Percy with keys and casket fittings. So little boxes, little chests that you could put something away that you felt particularly proud of.
What's in this one?
Let's have a look.
Ah. Oh. Very, very medieval newspaper. Lovely. Yeah. They were worried about the UN and Brexit even then.
Well, ongoing concerns, right?
All very fascinating. But I've seen absolutely nothing here to explain why people in a God-fearing village would be inclined to start hoarding human remains in a medieval pit. I think I've put it off long enough. It's time to examine the bones. Who am I kidding? This is the best bit. And luckily, they're only 15 miles away in Portsmouth.
This place was originally built in the 18th century to defend Portsmouth's royal dockyards, but now Fort Cumberland is the site of Historic England's archaeological archives. Look at all these lovely bones.
The human remains from Warren Percy were placed here in 1963 and mostly ignored for 50 years. Until Simon Mays, a human skeletal biologist, got his hands on them and spotted something very disturbing.
Simon, hello.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. These are not articulated skeletons. They're bones all jumbled up together. We've got 137 of them overall. And when we looked at them, we found they came from a minimum of 10 individuals.
Okay.
So each individual is very incomplete, haven't got very many bones from each person. And demographically speaking, they range in age from around 2 years old to people who are well over 50 years old at age at death.
Right.
And we've got males and females as well. So it's a real mixture of, men, women and children. So quite how they all ended up in this one pit is a bit of a mystery, really.
What is it about these bones that fired that investigative streak in you? What is it that you saw that made you go, hang on a minute, these are very odd?
Firstly, it's the burning. That's the most obvious thing.
OK, yeah.
And you've got mutilations that happened after death. You've got hacking trauma. So in other words, being struck by a bladed implement or a bladed weapon. You can see you have these fine knife marks orientated transversely across the front of the neck there.
Right.
Look at the pattern of burning.
Right.
What I think has happened is this person's been decapitated with a knife, and then the head, with the top view vertebrae still attached, has been put in a fire, which is why you have burning just to this surface here. So you've got decapitation, burning, decapitation, mutilation. You've got a sequence of events going on here.
So these are people of all ages, hacked to pieces, decapitated, burned. And Simon's barely got started.
So we also found some long bones that showed breakage.
This is a tibia, your shin bone.
That's right, so we're just above the ankle here. So we've got this clean break here. That wouldn't happen if the bone was old. You'd get a stepped, irregular surface.
Right, so this was white and pink, fresh and bloody when that happened.
I think it must have been.
So this bone was broken immediately or pretty soon after death, before it had a chance to dry out.
But also you've got this damage in this area here. So I think what's happened is that's where the blow has landed, a heavy stone or something, and then the bone was twisted to split it, hence this spiral fracture making its way up the bone.
Someone's twisted someone's leg off?
Essentially, yes.
My God, that's gruesome.
We don't know how they died. What we do know is they were treated very unusually once they were dead.
Simon, why?
Well, this was a really hard one to answer because when you discover something unexpected in archaeology, you think, well, somebody must have seen something similar before. So you start to look at literature and look for similar cases and see how people have interpreted them. The problem I encountered was that there weren't any similar cases. So they're being treated in a really unusual way. There must be something that really sets them apart from most medieval people.
CSI medieval archaeology.
A very cold case.
OK, so we've got this really bizarre assemblage of human bones that have been deposited in a pit in a village. Why? Why were these people so horribly mutilated? What had they done? Or who had done that to them? Were they murderers or were they murdered? Were they the good guys or the bad guys? There are a lot of questions in this one.
Indeed there are. And almost 60 years after the pit of mutilated bodies in the unconsecrated ground was discovered, experts are still trying to figure out what happened.
10 people's remains, including small children, chopped up, dismembered, burnt. What had happened? A battle? Mass murder? What was going on?
I mean, we're not talking about Stone Age people with unknown mystical beliefs. We know the villagers were Christian. Oh, let's face it, the church is a bit of a giveaway, isn't it?
So this is the church?
Yes.
Quite a good-looking church. A proper graveyard, consecrated ground
Yes.
for proper Christian burials. You've investigated the remains of humans found here.
Yes, about a third of the graveyard's been excavated. We found over 700 skeletons, which have all now been analysed.
These are the villagers of Warren Percy. The farmers, the blacksmiths, the murderers, basket weavers. Maybe the bodies from the cemetery hold a clue to explain the bones in the pit. Was this just a dangerous place to live?
And as far as you can tell, do they look as though they're people who died of natural causes, or might they be victims of battles or crimes?
There are very few that show signs of blunt force trauma, sharp force trauma, injuries of that sort which might indicate warfare or fighting. People have been hit with knives or axes or anything like that.
So all the signs of a settled, peaceful community. People come, people go, they get buried.
That's right.
But we've got these bodies in the pit up near the village, been, well, hacked around a bit, burnt for whatever reason.
Yes.
And then buried within the village. So what's going on there? The people who live in that farmstead, they're bone collectors, souvenir hunters? Maybe a medieval archaeologist then.
Could be.
I'm pretty certain we can rule out a serial archaeologist, Clive. So we know from the graveyard that Warren Percy wasn't a generally violent place. But could the people in the pit have died as a result of a single violent event? Or something like a medieval serial killer burying his victims in the back garden?
In order for us to work out what happened to these people, we need to know when they died. We need some proper dates. That way, we can look into the documentary evidence, see if there's an event that correlates. Maybe there was a raid, a battle, even a judgment of execution. Organic remains like human bone can be dated thanks to radiocarbon dating. The principle is that your body absorbs carbon-14 while you're alive, and then it decays at a known rate after you've died. So by measuring the amount of carbon-14 that's left in a sample, you can tell when that person snuffed it. You might not get an exact date, but fingers crossed, we'll get pretty close. So you radiocarbon dated these?
Well, that's right. So we could say when in the medieval period these people died.
And what samples did you take?
Well, we took samples from bones which showed cut marks, samples from bones which were deliberately broken, and samples from bones which were burnt. So we could kind of date the three types of changes that were occurring. Cut out small samples from the bones. So this is a clavicle.
Right, a collarbone.
That's right, so it kind of sits up here. And so before we cut anything, we examine this closely under a microscope to make sure we weren't destroying any important evidence.
And?
We have the results here.
Ah, OK.
So what we have is 14 individual radiocarbon dates, and we've got the date plotted along the bottom, and these black smudges are where those individual samples fall in terms of their date range.
This is not what I was expecting to see, because this person probably died before 1000 AD, and this person up here died probably in the 1300s.
Yeah, it's 2 to 3 centuries in terms of date range.
This changes everything. Some of these people had been dead for centuries before the others died. That's my medieval serial killer theory straight out the window. There is absolutely no way that all these people could have been killed and dismembered at the same time, which makes it even weirder that they all display similar levels of violence.
It's a repeated pattern of behaviour that was the same over a period of 2 to 3 centuries.
That is extraordinary. Are we dealing with murder victims?
Murder in the medieval period was quite common, and I've dealt with a lot of medieval skeletons where you've got evidence of lethal injury on the bones. There's no evidence that any of these people died an unnatural death.
Crikey. OK, so what do we know? Well, the people in the pit probably weren't murdered, but they were mutilated after death. We know that there's no obvious pattern to the victims because there are men, women and children in the pit. And we know this brutal activity continued over several centuries. I'm not sure what's going on. Clive, you were a barrister. Any ideas from your experience? And don't say aliens.
Don't worry, my idea is much more down to earth.
Ooh, that's good to get out of the cold evening. Now, Simon May's theory is that these people who ended up in the pit in Warren Percy, they can't have been murdered because there's nothing in the archaeological record. If you slit somebody's throat or gouge their guts out, that wouldn't show, would it? Oh, 2 pints, please.
I've come up with my own theory. Maybe the villagers just didn't like outsiders. Some kind of strange death cult like the Wicker Man.
Ah, Stuart.
I'm going to give Stuart his drink, he might need 1 or 2, and ask him what he makes of my theory.
Thank you very much.
2 stallions.
Yep.
The beer's not bad either.
Stuart's a tough audience. I've had worse.
So what if the people of this village were a particularly rough lot? Or they particularly didn't like strangers? Anybody straying in from another village or town or even further away, they might be tempted to bump them off.
It seems to me highly unlikely, I have to say, because if there'd been that sort of practice going on, the church would have had something to say about it, and it would have almost certainly been written down.
Yeah, well, that's why, you see, it was away from the church. The church is down there. They get I think you mentioned they brewed beer. They get the vicar drunk. He's out for the count. I can't keep the whole body. Keep a couple of bones for good luck, and you haven't found the rest of the bodies that are buried somewhere else.
But if they'd been buried in the site, I think we would have seen traces of them.
We've got to have an explanation as to why they're there.
Typical expert, always using logic and facts. So come on, Marianne, this is a good theory, a death cult that targeted strangers. Stuart won't budge unless you can back me up here with some of your science.
Funnily enough, Clive, because we have bones from the graveyard and the pit at Warren Percy, the experts at Historic England really can test your theory, because we can actually tell if they were strangers or not.
Finding out where the people in the pit were from is possible thanks to a really clever technique called strontium isotope analysis.
Strontium is a naturally occurring element and is found in human bone and tooth enamel.
And here's the clever bit. In different parts of the country, different levels, ratios of different strontium isotopes exist. So you can work out where they grew up, what they were eating, and where they lived just before they died.
Simon Mays, of course, has the answers.
Simon, hey.
I'm going to start calling him the King of Bones.
So what did the strontium analysis that you did show?
So we have the results from the churchyard burials, which are the light circles, and the pit burials are the dark circles. And as you can see, they're all basically within that local area. Essentially, there's no difference in the origin of the pit people as compared with the people in the churchyard.
So that means that the people in the pit who were burned, who were mutilated, who were hacked at, they were friends, they were neighbours, they were, you know, the people who live up the road from the other people in the village.
That's right. They were treating people in this way, people who they'd known, as you say, as neighbours and individuals in life. So they would have had personal relationships with these people. They weren't outsiders who were viewed in some ways different. You know, they were people from the community.
Curiouser and curiouser.
No, I mean, this is what science is often like. You're progressively ruling out different theories. You know, so we think, well, they're not outsiders, they're not murder victims. So, you know, we're forced to cast around for other explanations.
Sorry, Clive. It was a good theory. Excellent, even. Just one tiny problem. It's totally wrong. Warren Percy's bones don't belong to strangers. They were definitely locals. Which leaves us with a really disturbing question. Why on earth would locals to Warren Percy be treated in such a brutal way by their neighbours?
Well, Marianne, I've got no idea. far, I've frozen myself silly stomping around an empty field, visited the odd graveyard and drunk a few pints. But I've come away with nothing.
While I've spent most of my time stomping around a lab and playing with bones, with exactly the same result. We need to regroup and compare notes.
So we've got a few negatives here, or things we can rule out already.
Yeah.
We can rule out the idea it's strangers coming into the neighbourhood and being bumped off.
Yeah, the isotope analysis definitely confirms that these are local people.
And they're all different types of people. So there's men, there's women, there's children. So if it was all women, you might think, well, maybe they were killing them as witches. If they're all men, it might be getting rid of the yobs who are causing trouble. But no, it's all different types of people.
And because of the extraordinary range of radiocarbon dates, these are people who have come from different periods over a 300-year stretch.
Yeah.
So it rules out the idea that maybe this was one episode of violence. This is different people from different periods, generation after generation after generation, being treated in this strange, strange way and then ending up in the same pit.
So we've got to go through as many different possibilities of how this may have occurred,
Yeah.
and then see which one can't be disproved.
Pretty much. It's the last man standing with this.
Last man standing with a mutilated bone in his body.
Maybe we've been looking for answers in the wrong place. I wonder, could the weirdness that happened at Warren Percy result from something completely outside of the village's control? Like an act of God? So I've come to the gloomiest and darkest library I could find to take a look at the gloomiest and darkest parts of the historical record. Basically, I'm doing what all British people do when there's nothing else to talk about. Talk about the weather. Between the 11th and 14th centuries, there's lots of documented evidence that tells us Britain's weather fluctuated wildly.
In 1257-58, Britain suffered a cataclysmic change of weather. Many people attribute it to a volcanic eruption. It had a profound impact on Britain's weather. The contemporary chronicler Matthew Paris described a series of terrible rains. Here, in the Chronicles of the Mayors and Sheriffs of London, it describes that there was a failure of the crops, upon which failure a famine ensued. Many thousands of persons perished.
There's loads of references and details of famines in Britain during the period the bones were turning up in Warren Percy.
We've got the Chronicle of Bury St Edmunds. It describes in 1258 there was a great shortage of everything because of the floods of the previous year. Famine resulted so that the poor had to eat horse meat, the bark of trees, and even more unpleasant things.
What on earth can unpleasant things mean?
I think this chronicle might have the answer. The poor were forced to eat cats, dogs, and their children. People were so hungry, they were forced to resort to cannibalism.
It sounds crazy. After all, this was a Christian village with a church and everything. And it would mean that the village had some kind of cannibalism pit that it used again and again for around 300 years. But it would explain some very odd evidence from the remains in the pit.
When you look at the bones from Warren Percy and you see cut marks like this, could this be evidence in the archaeological record of starvation cannibalism? I think it could be.
Well, Mary Ann destroyed my stranger theory, but I'm a generous chap. Perhaps I can find evidence to support her cannibalism idea. This land hasn't changed that much in the last 500 years, so surely the best way to find out if it's susceptible to famine and drought is to ask someone who farms the same area today.
Hi, Chris.
Oh, good morning, Clive.
Clive Anderson. So what are you about here? What are you doing?
We're just loading up some feed to feed some fattening lambs into the back of the tractor, which we'll take down to put into their feeder.
Yeah. Shall I give you a hand?
Yes, please, if you could load one up.
Oh, God. It's heavier than it looks.
Obviously, medieval Yorkshire wasn't exactly overrun with tractors, but come on, how often do you get a chance to drive one?
I think this tractor might have been new when I last drove one. So it's got a first gear like that? Second gear?
I can never remember which position they're in, but we'll get you going. But if you'd like to start it, that's it, yeah.
I see nothing but disaster once this gets going.
That's it, now then.
Okay.
Yep, you're off. That's it.
The poor sheep will be starving by the time we get there.
They certainly will.
Oh, this is the life on the farm. 5 speed ahead.
Right, that's it there. Yep, lovely.
So you have sheep here. I see you've got a few pigs down there.
Yes. Well, we sometimes have cattle.
Yeah.
These lambs were born in March and April. That's how I make my living.
The villagers of Warren Percy would have been almost completely dependent on the land around here to keep them alive. So just how hard would it have been?
What are the challenges for growing stuff here? Like, what's the summer like?
Well, the summers vary enormously. This summer has been very hot and dry, and we've been short of grass, and the lambs haven't grown as quickly as they usually do. It's chalk underneath. Grass and crops will die if it doesn't rain for quite a few weeks.
Modern farming techniques have made it easier to cope with changes in the weather. But just imagine what it would have been like back in the 1300s. There certainly wouldn't have been shop-bought bags of feed to tide them over.
I've got some experience dealing with sheep.
Well, I can see you pulling the top off that bag with a bit of skill. Oh, right. Well, we'll get you back at spring.
Here I go.
Right, that's it. Lovely.
And they like this, do they?
They certainly do. This'll all be gone in 2 hours.
In medieval times, because there wasn't sort of, subsidies from the
Was there
central
not? I
government.
thought
No,
there
I don't
was.
think so.
Oh,
no.
right, yeah.
So if the crop failed, you just starved, didn't you?
I think it could have been terrifying. If you had several bad years in a row, which I believe sometimes happened, and you didn't know where your next food was coming from in a month's time, you would see starvation as a definite possibility, and we have no concept of that now.
The sheep that come first just eat all the food.
They're rather frightened of you strange Londoners.
Sometimes it's somebody called me a strange person, but I'll accept that. Well, it's very good to meet Chris and hear about farming today. But what was it like hundreds of years ago? There you had a bad harvest, or a dry summer, or a very cold winter. If your crops didn't grow, your animals died, what did you do? Well, you probably just starved.
So Mary-Ann could possibly be right. Maybe in desperation, the good Christian people of Warren Percy committed the ultimate sin of cannibalism over and over again. Every time the weather turned against you, you harvested the big lad at the end of the village. So I need to find out if the marks on the Warren Percy bones could be the result of cannibalism.
Well, I thought I might try and find out what sort of marks you do leave when you take the meat off a bone, you're doing butchery, by coming to a butcher's, a family butcher's, Appleton's, here in the centre of York. Oh, Richard.
Hi, Clive. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much for having me, and you're going to show me how to do butchery.
We're going to start on just a pig to start with.
Just a pig, and work our way up to humans.
Work our way up to no humans.
No humans.
If anyone can read meaning into cut marks on a bone, it'll be a butcher.
Got an apron for you to go on.
And hopefully Richard can point me in the direction of a few chops for my dinner. Lamb, not human.
A boater?
Yeah, perfect.
To keep the blood out of my head.
Yeah.
OK, jolly good.
All ready?
So, take me to your meat.
Apron and silly hat on, I'm ready.
All right, Clive, so we've got a nice leg of pork here.
How big a pig would this have been?
So this will be a 50, 60 kilo pig.
Yeah, so what's that, the same size as a human being?
Same size as an average sort of man.
Yes,
yeah.
OK. It makes him an odd question, but that's just what I'm interested in.
No, that's fine.
Don't take your thumb off.
Yeah, this is a hip bone.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is...
Which is connected to the thigh bone, as I remember.
Correct,
but,
yeah. So I'm just taking it out of here.
I'm going to have literally a stab at it.
So try and get as close to the bone as what you can.
I'm getting into this. This is getting too much fun.
Now release it completely off the...
I've got a bone.
Fantastic.
What do you reckon?
That's great, Clive. Yeah. 9 out of 10, I think, for your butchering skills.
Fantastic. How hard is the bone? I'm a silly question, but the blade goes into it, does it?
Yeah, the blade will cut into it, depending on how sharp your knife is.
Yeah.
Yes, certainly.
Obviously, a couple of hours wielding a knife in a butcher shop doesn't make me an expert.
Perfect.
So I want Richard's opinion on the cut marks on the Warren Percy bones.
So as you're using a knife, especially as I'm using a knife, I suppose, you do make the odd mark.
Yeah, the odd mark.
Yeah.
So can you see the mark?
Yeah.
Where we've cut into this bone?
Yeah.
Maybe
Well,
on
that
this?
looks like a bit of an incompetent... That must be one I did.
Yeah, so when
Yeah.
we're cleaning the meat off,
Yeah.
but it would be horizontal.
They're
but-
more like scrape marks when you do that. If are you always going like that?
Yeah, you're
that
always
angle?
going down the bone.
You're not cutting into the bone
You're not
normally.
cutting into
No,
the
I
bone.
just want you to look at some pictures here. So we got what, half a dozen cut marks
Yeah,
on this.
you can see them. They're
1, 2, 3, 4,
clearly
5.
cut.
Yeah.
And that's not what you would do in butchering.
So these aren't butcher's marks.
I don't think so.
No. So what's going on here? Why have we got wreck? You might do one mark like that for some reason, but these are 6 or so in a row, aren't
These are
they?
marks that somebody has purposely
Yeah.
cut. I don't know.
So there's some other reason for making those cut marks in
There
this
is,
bone.
yeah.
Right, well, an interesting trip to the butcher's where, reasonably enough, there's plenty of food for thought. But having looked at these cut marks and shown them to Richard, the master butcher, it doesn't support the notion that what was being done to these bones was butchery in order for the meat to be eaten.
Fair enough, Clive. You might actually be right. But not because of your impressive but rather unscientific experiment at the butcher's. It's because I found a way better theory. And it's going to make cannibalism look like the Walking Dead in the park.
So I'm on the road to find out a bit more about a burial that was discovered in Nottinghamshire. I've arranged to meet an archaeologist who knows the site to find out a little bit more.
Southall hit the headlines in 2012 when archaeologist Matt Beresford published a report about a skeleton discovered there in the 1950s. A skeleton that had odd things done to it after death. Sound familiar?
Matt's report was called The Dangerous Dead, and in it he describes this deviant burial. I want to know what he means when he says deviant. So, Matt, what am I looking at here?
So this is the site of where the deviant burial was found, so just in this area in front of us.
This was a normal Anglo-Saxon burial ground, but when it was excavated in the 50s, one body stood out. For all the wrong reasons.
What makes this one deviant?
So I've got a picture that I can show you. You can see there's the skeleton just laid out.
Unfortunately, archaeologists then lost the body, so we only have the picture to go on. But because it was found in an Anglo-Saxon cemetery, we know that this chap died at least 300 years before the Warren Percy bodies.
He had iron nails piercing his shoulders, his heart and his ankles. If we just zoom in, you can see still in situ, look at his ankles there.
That is insane.
He's literally been nailed to the ground.
So that there is a nail. This man has been put into a ditch and staked through the limbs
Yep.
and through the heart with massive pieces of iron.
Yep, gruesome.
Why on earth would a community living in, you know, a peaceful rural bit of Britain 1,300 years ago, why on earth would they be staking someone into the ground in a ditch?
Hold on to your hats for this one, because Matt thinks the people who did this were protecting themselves from the undead. Seriously.
People are worried about the dead returning back to haunt the living, and they use a whole manner of protective methods to try and stop that happening. Stakes through the heart, decapitations, they're placing large rocks on them, anything to stop the dead from returning. So if you mutilate it, you know, pin it down, then it can't reanimate.
So let me get this straight. Matt thinks this corpse was treated so badly because the locals were scared it would come back to life. Like a zombie. Let me just say that one more time. Like a zombie. And this was 3 centuries before the first body was buried at Warren Percy. So this belief, bonkers as it sounds, was very deep-rooted.
When you're saying that, I'm thinking that we're stepping outside of the pages of archaeology and we're stepping into the pages of fiction.
It's just bizarre, but there it is.
So we're clearly looking at after-death mutilations. The same kind of thing that happened to the bones at Warren Percy. Could those bodies have been dismembered for the same reason? To stop them, and I can't believe I'm saying this, to stop them coming back from the dead.
How long is this practice and this set of beliefs in existence for?
Well, you can get them from all different historical periods. So there's examples from prehistory, you get them to the Roman period, but a lot of them tend to be early medieval into the medieval. That seems to be when the sort of fear is at its height.
Bingo. Even the dates fit with the Warren Percy bones.
So what I have just heard pretty much changes everything. People in the medieval period were genuinely concerned about being haunted by the undead.
Now, of course, they didn't call them zombies in the Middle Ages. That word hadn't arrived from the Americas yet. They had a much better name for them. They called them Revenants, the medieval living dead. Clive's gonna love this one.
Well, Mary Ann's trip to Southall has pushed things in a slightly unexpected direction. Are we dealing here with revenants, zombies, the undead?
This feels like it's stretching credibility beyond breaking point. I'm pretty confident a serious academic will shoot this one down. The medieval undead. I don't think so.
Thank you for meeting me in this lovely church.
Dr. Marula Perisanidi of Leeds University is an expert medievalist.
So the undead, do people actually believe these things occurred? They're not just sort of fairy tales or myths?
Well, the English word revenant comes from the French revenir, to come back, literally, from your grave, in this case. But our sources were written in Latin. So they use different terms, such as, for example, the term monstrum, which is the origin of our English word monster.
OK, all very interesting, but that doesn't mean we're dealing with the actual undead.
This is what we would describe today as a zombie, right? A walking dead.
Yeah.
So this bonkers idea might actually be the answer to the Warren Percy mystery.
Did they behave like zombies that we might see in a horror movie? Were they...
Hungry for brains? Probably not.
Not hungry for brains?
Well, we don't have descriptions of how they walked exactly, and they didn't try to eat people. No. But they were the equivalent. Someone who comes out of their grave and they walk around disturbing people and harassing them and spreading fear. One theory is that it was the devil that reanimated them, and they were just the vessels of the devil. Or they thought that it was the soul. So if you had a bad death, a sudden death, a death that you're not prepared for.
Yes.
Actually, one of the Revenant stories has an example of a bad death, which is it's a husband whose wife is cheating on him.
Right.
And so he pretends to go away on a journey, but he stays there and actually catches his wife in bed with her lover.
Yes.
But he has an accident as he sees them, falls down, and he's about to die.
Yeah.
But he's so angry with his wife that he puts off making his confession, and he puts off receiving communion.
Yeah.
And he dies and comes back as a revenant.
Well, that's very unfortunate for her, isn't it? Because she's probably thinking, well, that's him out the way. But she can't relax. So what do they do? What do people do to stop this happening?
You would attack them physically, so with axes, decapitate them or dismember them. They could also sometimes place their head between their legs.
Yes, to slow them down a bit. So how many stories are there of these undead, these revenants?
There were definitely many stories that were orally transmitted. We have a few that are written down in the 12th century. So there is one story, a priest who was deemed to be too secular, so he liked hunting. He had hunting dogs, and that's not acceptable behavior for a clergyman. So when he died, he came back as an undead.
Oh, yeah, and how did his dogs react? Walking bones, it's dog heaven, isn't it?
So amazingly, medieval zombies are real. Or at least medieval people thought they were real enough to justify dismembering dead bodies.
It's the one theory that explains why these bodies were mutilated after death. So, was it zombies all along?
So if we go with the idea that these are the revenants, these are the undead,
Yes.
how does that explain how the bodies were treated?
We see the evidence for mutilation, dismemberment. That matches what the medieval sources are saying, you should do with a revenant. Burning the pieces in a fire, that's actually a medieval description. And we had that decapitated individual where the head had been cut off and then burnt. So the sequence of events matches the medieval sources. These are people who are local to the community rather than strangers. Again, revenants are people who are recognised by those who see them, so that again fits. The period we're talking about is the peak at which revenant stories are reported in medieval literature. So it's the right time. It makes sense from a sort of medieval view of things because they're violently physical beings. They kind of assault and sometimes even murder people. It's a physical problem. You need a physical remedy. So you dismember the corpse and burn it so it's no longer a threat.
How does that explain why there would be a 2-year-old in the pit? A baby?
What we have to remember is that these stories are written down for a reason. They're written down mainly by clerical writers to illustrate the consequences of sin. And so we can't expect them to tell us the full spectrum of folk beliefs. So, OK, the stories don't feature children. They very rarely feature women. But that doesn't mean the folk belief didn't encompass revenant children and revenant women as well.
So people in that pit of bones from Warren Percy were the revenant dead?
And I'm not saying that I'm certain of it as an explanation, but I think what I would say is that it's much better than the other explanations that we've been talking about.
So, after chasing down the clues, analysing the data, and ruling out the impossible, it must have been zombies. Brilliant. And this belief in the undead clearly wasn't a flash in the pan. We're talking Christian villagers mutilating corpses over a 300-year period and then tossing them into their zombie pit.
Zombies.
That's the conclusion, isn't it, after all this?
Yeah.
It's like Sherlock Holmes, isn't it? If you consider all the theories, if you eliminate things which are impossible, what remains, however improbable, must be the explanation.
We can eliminate the fact that it's starvation cannibalism.
So it's not a 300-year-old battle.
No.
They weren't killing strangers.
No.
They're more or less local people. So the only thing that fits in with all that was a real fear that certain types of people might not stay in the ground once buried, and therefore you mutilate them after death.
Would you make a good zombie?
I think I might, because I tend to wander around half asleep most of the time anyway, so if I just edge over into death, I think I could still move around at roughly the same speed.